Thank you for the invitation, Joel. So what I'm going to present today is more or less related to what I did during my PhD. So I was working at University of Girona in Spain, working on motion planning for autonomous underwater vehicles. And during my PhD, I did an internship at Rice University in Houston, where there is a group that is really specialized in motion planning. And then after I finished my PhD, I actually had 1 year of experience in the Netherlands. And then I went to Rice University for a postdoc, and now I'm back in academia after a year in industry in the US. So, okay, I'm going to make a presentation. This is not exactly what I will be doing. Just as a note, today is my first day at Cardiff University as a new lecturer or an assistant professor. So this is a work that I'm planning to continue collaborating with the University of Girona. So, okay. So one of the main motivations that we had for motion planning for autonomous underwater vehicles is the complexity of exploring underwater environments, no? Because what you have in underwater environments is that you have a high pressure environment, you have low visibility, or the conditions can change pretty quickly. You may have external perturbations, of course, because you have the wave, you have the currents. You have a navigation inaccuracy because you don't have access to GPS fixes. So it is impossible to correct the localization of the vehicle using GPS. There are some alternatives like using USBL systems that is basically you have a sonar and you have a boat or a ship, a vessel on top of the underwater vehicle that will help you to improve the localization of the vehicle. And of course, the cost. Underwater robotics is a really expensive area. It's a really expensive field. The mission is pretty expensive. A really small boat with 4 people and 1 day of mission could be more than 500 euros to justify it, at least that in Spain coast. So basically what we want to do with underwater research is we want to create bathymetries or maps of the sea bottom. And for that, you normally have one of these multi-beam sensors that is mapping the sea bottom. But because of the advances in sensors and actuators, and especially because of the increase in computing power, we have been able in the last years to start using what we call AUVs, or autonomous underwater vehicles, or better called underwater drones. So basically autonomous vehicles that will also allow to conduct an autonomous system and to map the environment and create these high resolution maps of the sea bottom. So the question of the main motivation that we had when I started my PhD, and it's still an area of research in Girona and in many other labs in the world, is how to make the vehicles smarter so that we don't have to navigate at a pre-established altitude. And of course, when you are navigating on a safe altitude, you basically lose part of the details because you are too far from the objects that you are trying to explore. So the main motivation, the main objective that I had during my PhD was basically to endow autonomous underwater vehicles with the capability to incrementally map the environment, because we assumed that the environment was unexplored, to be able to plan online three-dimensional path that they have to be safe, feasible according to the motion constraints. And I will explain more details about these particular parts. So basically, motion planning is a problem that consists in solving or to define a method that will find a connection between the start configuration and a goal configuration within the configuration space of a vehicle, or of a robot in general. So like there are different approaches to solve this problem, but I particularly focus on something that is called sampling-based methods. The sampling-based methods, this is one of the most famous one, is the probabilistic roadmap proposed by Professor Lydia Kavraki back in '96. Basically, instead of having an explicit representation of the configuration space, we basically define or generate random samples of the configuration space, and then we'll use a graph to connect those samples and to find a connection between a given start configuration to a goal configuration. A similar method was defined to, instead of creating graph, Stephen Laval proposed to use trees, and this method is called RT. It's also another really famous method. And it consists basically, it's similar. We generate random samples in the configuration space, and then we extend the tree so that we manage to connect a start configuration to a goal configuration. More recently, in 2011, Serta Karaman proposed the RT star and the PRM star that are basically variants of the basic methods in which if you let the algorithm to keep running, you will get a better quality solution. So instead of having these random solutions, you will get something that will be close to be optimal. So as you can imagine, for these methods, collision checking is really critical because for each sample that you generate in the configuration space and for each connection that you want to do within the graph or the tree, you need to do collision checking to verify that those samples or those connections are valid. So, well, single query, the methods that are defined with trees are basically the best that are used for navigation. They are really good for online planning, and I will also show why. So basically, coming back to the main objective, we wanted to plan feasible paths, safe paths, and they have to be incrementally mapped and planning online. So let's start with feasible and what feasible mean. Well, you probably have heard about the non-holonomic constraints of a vehicle, and the easiest example to understand this concept is understanding a car. No, when we have a car cannot move laterally. A car can only or has to be constrained to move like you need to combine the motion laterally and forward and backward. No, you cannot just move purely laterally. And an example of that is the RT also solving a problem. And this is assuming that you have a car that is initially starting from the green configuration and you need to get to the blue configuration. So basically, in order to get out of this situation, you need to turn around and then go to the goal destination. And why is this important? Well, unfortunately, I learned this the bad way. This is an experiment that we did in Girona with the vehicle navigating and following a mission that does not consider the holonomic constraints of the vehicle. So the main issue is that if you don't consider the constraints of the vehicle and you ask the vehicle to follow a path that doesn't consider those constraints, then the vehicle will probably have a behavior that is not expected, no? And that could be dangerous because basically when you ask the vehicle to follow something that is not feasible, the vehicle will just deviate from the planned trajectory and you may hit obstacles that you didn't consider when planning the path. So that's why planning and under motion constraints is really important to know that the path that you are generating is actually feasible. So how can we do that? How can we plan using sampling-based methods to use motion constraints? Well, it's more or less simple. It's basically you have a differential equation that represent the motion constraints of the vehicle. And in this particular case, we can approximate the torpedo-shaped vehicle to have a unicycle equation. So it's basically similar to a bicycle model. And with that equation, you can use it to extend the tree and to create new configurations to connect. And this is more or less the results that we got. No, we basically want to connect an initial configuration, both of them in the lower part of the figures, and then we want to go to a goal configuration that in the picture on the left is on the right side on top of the first block, and on the second figure is on top of the second block. But then one of the question is that, of course, the first two pictures that we have on top are valid, meaning that they are feasible for the vehicle, but they are extremely inefficient, no? And extremely inefficient basically because I was using a basic RT algorithms that it was just planning randomly and trying to connect the start and the goal configuration. And here, the figures in the bottom is basically using the RT star and using the Dobbins, that is a model to approximate the kinematics of a unicycle or of a bicycle. And then what we can do with these is obtain solutions that are asymptotically optimal, which means that if we let the algorithm to run long enough, we will get a solution that is close to the optimal solution, as you can see in the figures in the bottom. But one of the problems with planning these feasible solutions is that they could be unsafe, and I will explain that later. So, okay, navigating at a constant altitude or a constant depth is not really of interest in an underwater vehicle, because as I said in the beginning, the main objective with underwater vehicle was to be able to get close to those objects, to those underwater structures. So in order to do that, we should also consider the vertical motion of the vehicle and not constrain the vehicle to navigate on a plane. So in order to do that, we can also do a simple approximation by interpolating the vertical coordinate of motion of the vehicle. And then we extend the configuration space. We initially had a three-dimensional configuration space with X, Y, and theta. We can now have X, Y, and Z to express the vertical motion. So when we get solutions like that, so imagine that you don't want to use the kinematic constraints or the dynamic constraints of the vehicle. What could happen is that you ask the vehicle to dive and to go deep too fast. No, basically we're asking the vehicle to navigate and to submerge really fast, faster than the vehicle can actually do. No, and then we will have the situation on the right that it will be an unsuccessful query. You have the green light that is the planned path, and the blue one is the actual followed path. Instead, if you have the motion constraints in place, what the vehicle will do using a motion planner like this, it will probably circumnavigate while descending at the same time so that the vehicle can reach the desired depth. And then we have other more critical examples, like if we don't consider the kinematic constraints, like you will also see, I can maybe use a marker here. Yes, perfect. You see, for instance, in this part here, how when the vehicle is not considering the motion constraints, it's actually getting too close to the obstacle, the one here in purple on the left. And that can improve, of course, if, what happened to my pointer? There you go. Sorry. Oh, I got trapped here. Okay. Just a second. Okay, now. So when you consider the motion constraints, you see on the right that we don't have those situations, but we have a different situation when we plan too optimal path. Basically, we get too close to the obstacles. And that's the next problem that I'm going to explain here. Is there a way that I can just clear? Perfect. So basically, we need to also try to guarantee that the methods that we are planning are safe, the path that we are planning are safe, no? So what is the problem here? That when we are considering the optimality that is constrained just to the path lane, we are getting too close to the obstacles, no? So the idea is that we should get a cost function that will take us away from the obstacle, but at the same time, try to optimize the path lane. So you will see situations like these when you just consider the path lane, or you will have situations like this when you combine the risk of collision with the path lane. And in order to do that, you can define, for instance, a simple cost function that will integrate the risk of collision with respect to the distance. And that combined cost will give you the results on the right. In order to do that, we propose something that we call the risk zones. That is basically any time that an obstacle is hitting one of these safety rings or these safety zones around the vehicle, we will penalize, and we will increase the risk of collision. How can we do something to make it online to be able to map and plan at the same time? And this is something that is really critical with underwater vehicles. Probably the closest analogy will be also the aerial vehicles, because one of the main issues here is that we have limitation in the computation power. Because as opposed to what happens with terrestrial vehicles, where we can have multiple computers dedicated, for instance, one computer to localization, one computer to mapping, and one computer to planning. In an underwater vehicle, we are normally restricted to have at least, at most, 2 computers, but normally you just have 1 computer. So one of the challenges that I had at the time is to put everything in 1 computer and to make it work. And this is something that we propose with ROS and define different functionalities to be in a single computer. So we initially have the mapping module. The mapping module is using the Octomaps. The Octomaps is a voxel representation, a volumetric representation library that uses voxels to represent the environment. And it's an open source library, and it's also available for ROS. And then we extended the RT star. Well, we have a couple of publications where you can see the details about the extension of the method. that was implemented using the OMPL. OMPL is the Open Motion Planning Library that is used for these extensions. And then we have a third node that it was the mission handler. The mission handler was basically receiving the high-level commands where the vehicle had to go. And then it was coordinated, of course, the mapping module and the planning module. But I want to go more examples of the results that we got instead of just focusing on the theoretical part. So the first test that we did for this is, this is a breakwater structure that is located in San Feliu de Guixols in Girona. And this is the vehicle that we were using. We were using the Sparus 2 AUV, and it was endowed with a profiling sonar and with some echo sounders. And this is a work that we presented back in 2016 for IRIS. So here is the breakwater structure. The vehicle has no knowledge about the environment. No, it is assumed to be unexplored initially. This is the CAD model of the vehicle. That is the vehicle submerged, and you will have a buoy that is just giving Wi-Fi access just to be sure that everything is in order. And the vehicle is navigating among these two concrete blocks. What you see here is the vehicle basically scanning the environment, while at the same time is planning a collision-free path to navigate through the obstacle. You see how the path, the blue dots, are basically reshaping and adjusting to correct according to the information that is obtained through the sensors. So this is the combination that I was saying before, mapping for an unexplored environment while planning simultaneously and trying to make a motion that is feasible for the vehicle. And this is the overlap of those detections with a real-world image from Google Maps. Then the second one that I'm going to show is, we initially thought, okay, the breakwater structure is a really good proof of concept, but it's not really what we want to show. We want to show that the vehicle is able to navigate in really complicated and challenging scenarios. And for that, this is another paper that we presented in 2016 in Sensors. And here is the exploration of an underwater canyon, which is much more complicated because it has not regular shapes. And the vehicle is also more exposed to currents. In this particular case, what you're seeing is that the vehicle is detecting the rocks actually. And that information that you see didn't have it, that the vehicle didn't have it. The vehicle didn't have a map. It was building the map and it was just trying to go through the canyon. You see that the path is being reshaped, it's adapted, depending on the detections that the vehicle is getting from the scanning sonar that it's using. And something that was really interesting for us is that because this environment, we didn't know the actual shape from the boat, it was really different. We realized when we took, because the vehicle was also with 3 GoPro cameras, we actually noticed that the canyon is just getting narrower. So the canyon that we thought in the beginning that it was more or less 8 meters wide, it was in the end less than 5 meters. It was a really tight canyon for the vehicle to navigate in. Because of course the vehicle has to be at least 2 or 3 meters deep in order to avoid the wave in the surface. And then once the vehicle was able to complete the mission, we asked the vehicle to go back to the initial position. We asked the vehicle again to go inside the canyon to complete the imaging loop. And then you will see something that is really incredible. And this was a really amazing result that we had back in 2016. We using the 3 GoPro cameras that we had in the vehicle, we were able to basically map and create this 3-dimensional reconstruction of the canyon. And this is what I was telling you before. The canyon is just getting narrower as you go deeper. And this is a really interesting result because this is the way that we proved that the vehicle was able to navigate in initially an explored environment, and that we could use these tools that we implemented in ROS, combining mapping and planning modules to explore social challenges environment. No? So after we did this, we also use the vehicle in simulation. This is a project that is still ongoing in Girona. They are trying to explore not an underwater canyon, but an underwater cave. We did some preliminary works in another PhD thesis to map this place. And what we did is, okay, when I was finishing my PhD, and this is another paper that we published in Journal of Field Robotics last year, was to prove that the framework that we were proposing was capable of navigating in difficult three-dimensional environments. So the canyon was navigated at a constant depth, no? But in this particular one, the example of the cave, the vehicle has to use all the possible motions, not only lateral, but also vertical motions, so that the vehicle can adapt to the different altitudes or depth of the environment. And maybe just to wrap up and go to the questions part, this is another interesting application that we also implemented in ROS. This is a collaboration that we did with an institute in France called IFREMER, that is an institute dedicated to ocean research. They have a huge AUV, much bigger than the one that I was using in Girona. It's a really expensive one that is called the Asterix AUV. And they are using this for real work applications. No, this vehicle can go 3,000 meters deep, like to actually find shipwrecks or plane wrecks. No, and then the application that they told us in this project that we were participating with them is sometimes you send the vehicle to explore a desired target, and you try to cover the area, but unfortunately, since you don't know how the area is that you are trying to cover, sometimes the mission is not enough because you find gaps, or you find a potential target, something that is of interest. But then what they have to do is they have to retrieve the vehicle, extract the data, process the data, replan a new mission, and send the vehicle back to the water. Again, this is incredibly expensive because for this vehicle, you don't have a small vessel with 4 people. You have a whole crew of people working for this vehicle. So it's incredibly expensive. So what we propose here is, okay, we're going to do something to deal with those situations. We're going to basically propose a ROS architecture. In this particular robot, we did have 2 different computers. One computer is dedicated for the low-level control and the low-level control of the vehicle and low-level control of the hardware, including thrusters and sensors. And you have a high-level computer that is in ROS, or is using ROS to basically do a high-level control of the mission. And within that high-level control, we included different functionalities like detecting the gaps or the targets. And again, a mission handler, a path planner, and a path following controller. And this is the last video that I will show today. This is the vehicle. As you can see, the vehicle is huge. We're deploying here the vehicle. We were exploring an area where we knew that there was a plane wreck. This is the vehicle exploring the area. This is real world data. We intentionally left a couple of gaps in the mission that we defined. This initial part was the part that is typically included in any commercial package for these vehicles. So the vehicle is here creating the other part of the mission. You see now that we have a gap between the first part and the second. Here you have the second gap. And in the cert, that is really difficult to see, but there was an object. So we detected the 2 gaps. We also detected the target. But now, instead of just taking the vehicle out of the water, retrieving the data and process the data, we did everything in ROS on board the vehicle. The vehicle autonomously detected the 2 gaps and the potential target. And after completing the initial vehicle, we took over the control of the vehicle and we sent the vehicle to complete the mission. So now the vehicle is navigating deeper, exploring the potential targets, so the plane wreck. And after that, the vehicle is saying, okay, I still have 2 gaps that I didn't cover in the beginning. I will go and cover those gaps. And if I find something else, like another potential target, I will also go and further explore that potential target. This is another work that we presented in Oceans 2017. So, and that's all. It was a really short time, but I tried to do my best to just stick to the given time. And yeah, I will be happy to answer any questions.